The wine-tasting room was buzzing with laughter, clinking glasses, and the sound of confident voices swirling words like oak, bouquet, and finish. Among the seasoned sommeliers and high society guests stood a quiet woman in a plain dress, holding a single bottle of homemade wine wrapped in nothing but a brown paper label. She didn't come from a famous vineyard. She had no name in the wine world. And from the moment she stepped in, people barely acknowledged her presence, except to smirk at the simplicity of her appearance. Whispers floated through the air, mocking her. Some wondered if she was lost. Others chuckled, assuming she'd brought grape juice. But this woman, whose hands still smelled faintly of soil and sun, had poured her heart into that bottle. It wasn't just wine to her. It was years of tending to her vines in silence, learning through trial and error, and trusting her instincts over textbooks. She didn't speak much as others dismissed her, their polished shoes and designer suits a stark contrast to her worn-out flats. But there was something steady in her eyes, something that didn't waver even as critics rolled theirs. As the tasting began, glasses were raised and dismissed one by one. Judges swirled and spat, praising expensive bottles with French names and designer seals. No one expected anything from her, not even a sip. But when her bottle was finally opened, something strange happened. One judge paused. Then another took a second taste, brows furrowed in surprise. Murmurs turned to silence. Glasses were leaned in, eyes began to widen. This wasn't supposed to happen. How did a woman with no training, no connections, and no fancy branding manage to stop the room cold with just a single pour? What secret was hidden in that humble bottle that could challenge years of tradition, silence her critics in a way no words ever could? You're about to find out. Her name was Alina. She lived in a small cottage on the edge of a quiet village, far from the glittering world of wine competitions and glossy magazines. She wasn't rich. She didn't come from a long line of winemakers. In fact, her only teacher had been her late grandfather, who once grew grapes on a single acre of stubborn land. After he passed, people expected the vines to wither, just like the memory of his name. But Alina stayed. She worked alone, waking before sunrise and pressing grapes by hand in the same old wooden press he once used. Every bottle she filled carried a piece of that story, earthy, raw, and real, while other vineyards boasted expensive tools and teams of marketers. Alina had only one goal: to craft something honest. But honesty doesn't always get applause. At smaller fairs and local markets, her wine was often overlooked. Judges called it too simple, too rustic, or not refined enough for modern taste. Yet every time she thought of quitting, she'd remember the way her grandfather used to say, "Wine is made for people, not trophies." So when she was invited by mistake, some said, to the prestigious tasting event in the city, most assumed she'd quietly back out. But she didn't. She packed that one bottle, kissed the vines goodbye, and caught a bus. It was the same day elite winemakers from Italy, France, and California shipped in crates stamped with gold. They came with entourages and egos. Alina came alone. Inside the room, the difference was clear. The air was filled with polished words and sharp glances. No one believed someone like her belonged there. Some even scoffed when they saw her handwritten label. But as her wine touched their lips, something unexplainable began to shift, and no one was ready for what would happen next. As the judges leaned in, murmuring over the mysterious taste of Alina's wine, the room grew noticeably tense. It wasn't just surprise, it was discomfort. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go. Whispers began circling among the elite. Some suggested the judges were being too generous. Others accused Alina of adding something unnatural, some trick to make her wine stand out. A few top vineyard owners exchanged stiff looks, suddenly unsure of how to explain what they were tasting. Among them was Victor Laurent, renowned winemaker whose family had won 3 years in a row. He prided himself on perfection, aging his wines in imported oak barrels and spending thousands on consultants. The moment he tasted Elena's wine, his confident smile flickered. It reminded him of something older, more honest, something he couldn't replicate with all his wealth. But instead of admitting it, he leaned over to the panel chair and muttered something under his breath. Elena saw it, but she didn't flinch, at a nearby table. Sophia, young food blogger trying to make a name for herself, had her camera fixed. On the unfolding scene, she'd come to capture the glamour, the sparkle of the high-end wine world. But now, she was filming something much more raw and real. A woman no one had noticed, suddenly becoming the center of attention. Sophia didn't know much about winemaking, but she knew a story when she saw one. And Elena's quiet strength pulled at her curiosity. Meanwhile, across the room, a man in a suit scribbled notes. He wasn't a judge or a critic. He worked for a big wine distributor, scouting for potential investments. He'd passed by Elena earlier, assuming she was a guest's assistant. Now he watched closely, sensing a shift in the air, one that could threaten the usual order. As the crowd struggled to make sense of what they were witnessing, some were drawn in by the purity of the wine. Others were determined to tear it apart. And through it all, Elena remained still, letting the wine speak louder than words. But the storm behind those smiles was only just beginning. Elena could feel the weight of every glance in the room now. What started as mild curiosity had turned into something sharper. The whispers grew louder, and not all of them were kind. Some people questioned if her wine even met the event's standards. One woman loudly asked if background checks were done on all entries. A few laughed, not at the joke, but at the permission it gave them to doubt her out loud. The head judge, a man named Charles Whitmore, with decades of experience and a reputation for being brutally honest, stared into his glass with a look no one could read. He didn't speak for a long moment, just swirled the wine again and again. Then he stood up. All eyes turned toward him. A hush fell over the room as he cleared his throat. But just as he opened his mouth to speak, Victor interrupted, standing. "As well, I think it's fair to ask where this bottle came from," Victor said, his voice calm but edged. "Because, if we're being honest, it doesn't fit the competition. No label, no vineyard registration, no records. How do we even know what's in it?" Several people nodded, seizing on his words. Elena remained silent, her bottle still on the table, untouched by her own hands since the start. She looked toward Charles, who didn't answer right away. The silence stretched. Meanwhile, Sophia had quietly stepped closer, her camera capturing it all. She could see Elena's hand gently gripping the edge of the table, just enough to steady herself. The tension had reached a breaking point, and everyone knew it. Would the judges defend tradition or truth? Behind them, the man from the distribution company typed furiously on his phone. A message, a name search, something. The air was tight, full of held breath and forced smiles. And just when it seemed like anyone might come to Elena's defense, a staff member rushed in from the back, holding a folded envelope with a gold seal. He handed it to Charles without a word. Charles took one look inside, and his eyes widened. No one knew yet what was written in that letter, but it was about to change everything. Charles held the envelope tightly, his jaw tightening as he read the contents. His silence became deafening. Elena's heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained still. Across the room, the crowd leaned forward, sensing something was off. The wine tasting had already taken an unexpected turn, but no one expected a sealed letter to shift the air even more. Then Charles slowly looked up, his voice calm but strained. "It seems," he said, glancing directly at Victor, "we've received a last-minute certification from an independent lab. This wine was anonymously submitted weeks ago for quality testing." He paused. Not only did it pass every regulation, it received the highest score ever recorded by the lab. Gasps echoed. But the twist didn't stop there. Charles continued, his voice firmer now. And according to this report, the grape strain used in this wine is genetically unique, not cloned, not imported. It's a heritage vine not found in any modern commercial vineyard. Elena's eyes widened. Even she hadn't known that. Victor stepped forward, his tone sharpening. That's impossible. Every viable grape strain has been catalogued. There's no such thing as an unknown varietal, not at this level. He turned to Elena, voice rising slightly. Where did you get those vines? She hesitated. The room, watching her every breath. They were my grandfather's, she said softly. He said they came from seeds his father brought over. I never tested them, I just grew them. Now the tension turned into something else. For some, awe for others. If Elena's vines were truly one of a kind, it wasn't just her. Wine at stake. It meant a disruption to the entire wine industry's foundation. Centuries of tradition were suddenly under threat. Sophia's camera was still rolling, now catching the sharp divide forming in the room, those desperate to protect the old system, and those curious enough to question it. And as Charles carefully set the envelope down on the judging table, one thing became clear to everyone. This night was no longer just about a tasting. It was about a reckoning. The room fell into complete silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Tea